Hello, my beloved Latter-day Struggles 2.0 listeners. Those of you who are interested in transcending and including Mormonism, and those of you who are interested also in deepening your spirituality after the faith crisis. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm so excited that you are my people. I'm so excited that so many of you have jumped into the Latter-day Struggles Live, where we get together and actually talk about these very topics, both the Friday series and the Monday series. This is a big one because this is sort of a foundational series to better help us understand some significant ways that you in your own life can achieve wholeness, can achieve awakening or consciousness. These are words that I've recognized that we don't really talk about in Mormonism. Wholeness, awakening, transformation, consciousness. And so 3 examples that we're going to share with you today. And all of these examples are sort of like equal opportunity. I wanted to include people that are on all of the spectrum of Mormonism, from the very devout to the very, beyond Mormonism, and perhaps even sort of like way out. So inside of the edge, outside of the edge, way in and way out. We all do some kind of idiosyncratic things.
Okay, so examples of how members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are frequently well developed in certain areas or categories of their lives, and in other areas they may be underdeveloped, would be somebody who is very, very intelligent and what we would call cognitively complex, but in their spirituality is still very literal mythic. Okay, so we all know people who in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are highly educated, very, very much leaders in their fields. I know just recently President Nelson died. Whatever your feelings were of President Nelson as the leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, very few people could argue that he was not a leader in his field. He was a very gifted surgeon, and he contributed a lot to the scientific knowledge around heart surgery. That is an unarguable point, okay? But we also know that President Nelson spoke about, for example, the temple garment that we wear is the exact same temple garment that Adam was given, right? And most of us who have moved into a place of more figurative spirituality, we believe, many of us begin to think of the garden narrative as a story that is not literal. It's a myth intended to teach good spiritual principles. I mean, there are definitely some things we can learn about the garden narrative, but many of us, if not most of us, no longer believe in the literal Adam and the literal Eve placed in a garden 6,000 years ago so that they could eat fruit, fall, and bring Satan into this world. And so I think that we can all think of in our own lives people who fall into this category. Really, really intelligent, good at what you do in your work, well-read, good lawyers, good doctors, great teachers, amazing scientists, historians. The church is full of really educated and motivated people, and also people whose spirituality still falls very much into the category of, if I drink coffee, I cannot live with God forever.
Are we binary thinkers? Are we able to see things in gradients of color? Because human beings that are on an early faith journey, I say this tongue in cheek, but it seems to resonate with the people I talk about. It seems like sometimes we only have enough complexity to be dangerous at first. And what I mean by that is we generally have enough complex thinking skills that our cognitive line is moving forward, but we also have an entire life's of experience of being pretty binary thinking. And so oftentimes we take that brand new, early developing, like this line is just coming, it's just moving. And so all of a sudden we become like these sort of social justice warriors out of the blue. And we're all of a sudden awakening in a very lovely way to all of these areas where where our tradition has not been inclusive. We're like, oh my goodness, I'm having a feminist awakening. I'm having a gender and sexuality awakening. I can't believe we treated LGBTQ people like this. I can't believe, we don't care about the environment. Like all sorts of things sort of begin to awaken. But unfortunately, because they're just barely awakening and we still reside by and large in quite a lot of black and white thinking, what tends to happen is that we struggle with recognizing that all we're doing is we're taking, we've got some good ideas, but we're unwittingly adopting just a new dominator hierarchy. Okay, so it's like, I don't hate gay people anymore. I just hate the people that hate gay people now.
Right.
So we are still enough black and white thinking that we've just created a new bad guy.
I think that that's a really important point to talk about shadows, because I think that you can really easily look at the church and see where shadows really are holding us back, right? For example, you and I have just finished watching a whole bunch of different documentaries on polygamy and the abuses that communities who are currently practicing polygamy, the FLDS community, for example, the abuses of children and the abuses of women and the abuses of the young boys in those communities that are taking place, right? Now, within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the leaders of the church for the Q12 and the First Presidency, they know, for example, that forcing a 14-year-old girl to marry an adult man would be repugnant. It's horrible and illegal, but it's also morally repugnant. But as a church, we can't come out and openly condemn that because we have a leader who initiated polygamy and married a 14-year-old girl. So until we as people deal with our shadows, until we come out, for example, as a church and say, we believe that Joseph Smith marrying a 14-year-old girl was wrong. In fact, we believe Joseph Smith introducing polygamy is wrong. If we don't come out and say that and just acknowledge the shadow associated with all of the problems in polygamy, if we don't come out and say it, we will never be able to morally develop and become the moral voice against abuse, underage marriage, all the things that come with this. We can't be a moral voice in the community for those things because of that shadow.
I'm loving what you just said, Nathan. And I actually was scanning my mind and my notes about, okay, what he's touching into is a specific line of development that that Nathan's referencing. And you actually came to the same conclusion I did. It's the moral line.
Yeah.
The moral development is lagging because of our own shadow parts within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Even knowing this phenomenon of categories of development within ourselves and with others, in and of itself is healing, right? In other words, making sense of our own stories, making sense of why do I do seemingly so well in some areas and seemingly so, like, why do I struggle so much in other areas? That this has been chronically something that I've wondered about. Like, why is it so easy for me to be, show up in certain settings here, but my goodness, I feel like I'm so behind over there. And when the integral theory broke this down and taught me about this element of radical wholeness, it was just in some ways like a floodgate of gratitude and inspiration. Like it hit me like, I get it. I get myself. I understand. And when we understand this, we can move forward and focus on parts of our identity that are a little bit behind with love and compassion, no shame. The next episode that I'm going to do, I think it's just going to be me, is I am going to talk about how each of these 5 tenets of radical wholeness talk to each other, how they are interconnected. And we've already started to kind of play with this idea, how they really, really do contribute, add to or take away from each other. The more we do one, the more it contributes to the other kind of thing. And I'm going to really play with how all of these interact. So stay tuned for that next time. Thank you all so much for being here. If you want to join the Friday, well, you're already in the Friday fellowship. If you want to just amp that up just a tiny bit and jump into the live fellowship, This is one of the subjects we're going to be working to, as a group, as a community, we're going to take this whole series and we're going to spend some time actually deepening our own understanding by listening to each other, talk about our aha moments, what we're learning, how we're growing, how this is becoming a part of our own map of meaning as we continue deepening our faith journey. So join us if you want to be a part of something that will help you and your psychological, spiritual development. Thanks, y'all. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Latter-day Struggles. If this podcast has supported your faith journey, we invite you to explore the many ways you can continue your healing and growth with us. On our website, you'll find support and processing groups, marriage and parenting courses, and free resources to support where you are in your faith journey. You can also join Valerie in the live fellowship gatherings throughout the year, where we connect, process the podcast, and build meaningful friendships with others on similar paths. If cost has ever been a barrier, we offer podcast scholarships funded by listener donations. To explore all of these offerings, visit the link in today's show notes or go to latterdaystruggles.com. And if this podcast has been meaningful to you, leaving a 5-star review is one of the most powerful ways to help others find this work. Latter-day Struggles is proud to be part of the Dialogue Podcast Network.
Dialogue Podcast Network.